Hi, Professor Storyk. This is Henry Yuliano. Thank you so much for a fantastic semester. I'm going to be walking you through my presentation on my proposed studio. Obviously, to clarify, this is a proposed studio. This is not my listening space. This is a simulation of a composite of lessons that I've learned this semester. So I want to walk you through my inspiration for the program. I had a couple of inspirations, and they were kind of disparate seeming. I'm a huge fan of the music of New Order and Happy Mondays that came out of Manchester in the mid to late 80s, specifically centered around the Hacienda nightclub and concert venue in Manchester. I was also inspired by the live room of East West Studio 2 in LA, obviously iconic recording space, and everything from Californication to The Partridge Family was recorded at East West Studio 2. It's known for its very tall ceilings, big live room that its website states has a high mid punch character to it. Public Records was also another inspiration for me because it's an audiophile stream. It's here in Brooklyn where I live. And I very much recommend, if you're ever in Brooklyn, going to it. It has a pretty impressive design, as I'll walk you through. And the last inspiration was Denise Koyu's EDM studio. It is a production-oriented personal studio. Focused on dance music, as I will evince and walk you through as part of the program. And over here I just have this card. It's a little excerpt from the essay that the Hacienda, the club, was actually inspired by Ivan Sheshkov's formulary for a new urbanism. And also in that essay, he talks about how part of the program for new cities should be a continuous drift. And I really liked that phrase, continuous drift. I like the idea of this kind of flow between, specifically, I mean, obviously, he wasn't talking about it in the essay, but I was thinking the flow between artist and audience and how to integrate those things together so that they can interact with each other in a more natural way that it isn't as staggered by hierarchy. And just visualizing the program. Obviously, we have some wonderful pictures of some mid-'80s ravers down here, and this is an actual picture of the Hacienda Club. It was a warehouse. I actually think it was, I mean, it's often cited as a warehouse. It was so many clubs in Manchester in the mid-'80s came from warehouses. I think that the Hacienda was actually a train station that was then turned into a shipyard or ship, display for people trying to buy yachts before it eventually got into the hands of Tony Wilson. This is East West Studio 2. You can see it's hard to see here. There's perforated Helmholtz pegboard kind of panels here. And I love these, the contoured like wooden slats, and obviously they've got absorption, membranic absorbers, it looks like, in the ceiling. Obviously the ceiling is very high and it's pretty wide. And I've got a little diagram, 2D diagram down here. It's got an ISO booth as well. It's a pretty sizable ISO booth. A control room, another ISO booth. This is Public Records in New York, and as you can see, this also has these Helmholtz resonator panels. Also in the ceiling, it's contoured, and these speakers themselves are very it's an elaborate, creative, artistic setup. I think his name was Doug Turnbull, who designed these speakers specifically for the space. And finally, we have this, seemingly it's a very small control room, production-oriented studio. Denise Koyu is a fantastic electronic producer, and I love the design. I also love the workflow that he has. It's pretty simple, but I like his collection of outboard gear along with his SSL matrix, um, and his mains and how he has it all positioned. It feels very streamlined, specifically for making human sounding dance music, which I really love. So, part of the program for Continuous Drift as a studio, it will be focused on dance music and defining that program, because dance music is obviously a very subjective term. Artists have to be comfortable with testing their mixes at public nights for dance audiences. That doesn't mean that they have to be comfortable playing their mixes that day, the day that they tracked. That would be a bit of a insane ask for the kind of music that I'm sure will kind of be attracting. But they have to eventually be comfortable, be okay with having either them or their DJ or someone come back, either a day or a couple of days or at some point later, playing their mixes pre-release. A large live room with a controlled, reverberant sonic signature that will be amenably pleasing to the act of listening as well as the act of tracking. So the live room doubles as this space for public audiences to come in and enjoy music being played. A sizable control room with enough space for gear and instruments while also maintaining a neutral sonic signature. So a very conventional control room. An ISO booth for controlled tracking of individual instruments and vocals, a machine room for amplification. As a nightclub, I kind of touched on this before, but Continuous Drift will employ its large live room to host public dance nights. And a kind of on the financial side of things, I'm planning on starting ticket prices low and increase as word of mouth and popularity increases. A dedicated bar and social room that will cater to the public while also serving as a relaxation and dining location for artists while tracking. So, your classic social room for artists has a kitchen, but it can also be a bar. Confluence of talent tracking and open public enjoyment will make this space both exciting and unique, allowing artists and audience to interact in a setting that's simultaneously social and creative. This is the idea. This is where I feel like the idea of continuous drift kind of comes into play because, as word of mouth spreads, people will come, yes, to enjoy the music because it's a great sounding dance club and the bar is great and the space is cool and it's a great activity to do. But also because they'll know that they're going to be listening to music that hasn't been released yet. And maybe they'll be there when artists are there, if not tracking, at least enjoying and surveilling how audiences are responding to their music, specifically in a dance format. Maybe artists will hang out in the control room, which might be like a little bit of a VIP DJ booth. But, they might be at the bar, and it might be cool to kind of be around artists. Oh, like, is that St. Vincent? I don't know if it's St. Vincent. Well, maybe that last song was St. Vincent. I mean, it sounded like her. A kind of excitement is what I'm planning on capitalizing on. And the excitement specifically being that you're there to enjoy music and the artist is there to enjoy you enjoying the music. And putting theory into practice with a budget, I kind of came to the conclusion very early on in making this presentation that there's just so much in creating this space, so many variables that in and of itself, it would probably take an entire semester to accurately come to a conclusion as to how much money should be spent on this specifically. I did this kind of cursory estimate, and a large size auditorium constructed with mainly concrete is around between $3.8 and $4.2 million. This is obviously a huge square footage, the variable that's being used for this calculation. Continuous drift wouldn't be this big But at the same time, there might be some demolition that comes into play. There's definitely going to be a lot of codes that need to be followed with in respect to the liquor that's going to be served and the amount of, obviously, the music equipment and the insulation, isolation, absorption, um, making it look nice. So obviously all those variables will tack on. So I'm assuming that a budget of 5 million will be more than enough. Obviously, well, no, not obviously. I don't have that at my disposal, but theoretically, I feel like this would be a more than healthy budget to go about actualizing this project. Isolation. Inspired by the hacienda, as well as the currently low price points for homes in the Hartford area of Connecticut, my plan is to place my studio at 485 Middle Turnpike East, Manchester, Connecticut. Manchester, Connecticut, obviously, is a callback to Manchester, UK, but also as a on a more business-oriented side, it's a relatively cheap place for real estate at the moment and is not too far from New York. And considering how everything in real estate is headed, it seems as though everything is just becoming incredibly more expensive, especially places that are both at least somewhat pretty and also close to a major urban center like New York. Therefore, Manchester, Connecticut is a very pretty city. It's not on the water. It doesn't boast, very big dynastic Kennedy family's summer homes, but it is a gorgeous little town, and it does have a lot of buildings, and specifically like industrial textile buildings that are for sale for relatively cheap price points. One of them being 485 Middle Turnpike East. Middle Turnpike is a Connecticut colloquialism for a not so, in my experience as someone who's from there, a not incredibly busy road that is essentially doubling as a main thoroughfare through a small town. So the name is kind of deceiving. It struck me too. I was like, oh, is this going to be a busy town? No, it's just kind of a normal random road that's called Turnpike. It's not completely isolated. It's obviously, as you can see, it's right next to the house and a couple of houses, and it's right on the street. But with some thoughtful planning and some about the program, about the construction rather, I think that the program will be healthy and in simpatico with its neighbors. And as you can see, there's some information about the building. I'm not a builder. I'm not a contractor. I would probably have to come to the conclusion as to whether or not I want to keep the foundation of this place here, depending on how much of it is concrete and how much space I need. We'll see from my calculations. Like, I ended up going to around 58 feet. It seems like this is 50 feet as it is right now. 99 and 81. Like this is totally fine. Like I'm not concerned about that. But I did end up going to 58 feet in terms of width for the entire building. And one of the great things also is that it has this parking lot, but it also comes, you can't see, it's over here, but it comes with this parking lot that fits like 10 to 12 cars, which would be awesome for a big band who wants to record there. Okay, so going to isolation while construction, live room and mix room, combination of brute force mass, decoupling, and insulation wall will ensure that even in circumstances with a busy and loud program, the studio will operate in peace and on good terms with its neighbors. Mass, I'm looking for at least 2 feet of concrete as well as other insulation in between the outer wall and the inner wall. Decoupling two separate walls made of 2x4 wood stud partitions separated by a 3-inch gap. Obviously I was kind of following what our lesson detailed as the best kind of partition, the best kind of decoupling method to ensure a high SDC. Diagram showing the wall's isolation. The mixed room will have more intensive brute force construction, of course, as we'll get into. Ensuring a mid-70s SDC with isolation will be optimal. And so here I have some loose diagrams of the materials, and I go into more detail here. Goal for noise criterion for the mixed room is NC20 with the shear level of baffling and brute force low frequency isolation. We can hopefully expect an OITC a similar value with more mass separated by the outer wooden wall with an additional 3 inches of fiberglass insulation. We can expect very good isolation for monitoring mixing. Thinnest concrete wall between live room and mixed room will be approximately 2 feet thick minus isolation buttresses. So all that's to say, ensuring that there's a decent amount of concrete, regardless of the partitions and decoupling and other methods being used. Making sure that there's that amount of space is really important. Obviously 2 feet is, the smallest, and that's in between the live room and the mixed room. I think that's okay, especially considering the amount of decoupling that's going to happen. This is what I would say is the western wall of, the southern wall, depending on which road you're looking at. But if this is the vertically is going, the live room is going this way. And so this is the western wall of the live room. We have, putting into practice, our partitions with the insulation in between, then another 3 inches of fiberglass insulation, 5 feet of concrete, and then at the very end here we have the outer wooden wall. And this is just to kind of give a cursory understanding of the construction that's going to be taking place in order to ensure isolation between the rooms, the studio on the outside, and also the rooms on the inside. Okay, focusing on live and mixed room doors and windows as they are the most important. Obviously, there's going to be doors in between the social room and the hallway leading into the sound lock, but those are kind of secondary to the main rooms in the program. The main entrance double door over here is double door with sound lock, mudroom door. So a main entrance double door that goes into a sound lock. The pair of back doors with a 5-foot air gap will lead to a mudroom that acts as a back public entrance for the space. So this is where people will come in. Behind these doors is this airlock that kind of acts as this this buttress in between, sound lock in between the doors at the end of the other pair of double doors and this pair of double doors. 7 feet in diameter, 7.5 feet tall, both sealed and 1 foot thick with a layer of aluminum in between 2 outer layers of wood. And those ending details right there are essentially what the doors are going to be throughout the studio, regardless of whether or not they're double doors and how wide they are. One thing I wanted to note is that the reason that I wanted to make sure that these doors were double doors because if people, and tall, because if bands wanted to come in with lots of equipment, as they are often to do, I wanted to ensure that people would be able to get their equipment in there. A difference in between the double door to the social room, only 5 feet in width. I didn't think that we needed it to be as wide. Door to the mixed room is 3.5 feet width. Sound lock directly outside the live room will be approximately 5 leading the hallway. The sound lock directly outside the mixed room will be approximately 5 foot by 8 feet leading to hallway that will lead to the social room. I'll show you that in the rendering. The door to the ISO booth and machine room are 3 feet in width. Those are these ones over here. Obviously, it might be a little confusing to visualize with just these disparate images of doors, but I'm going to, I'll clarify it later on when I show you the 2D renderings. So this is just kind of giving you an understanding of the calculations going into the isolation. Single window into the live room. So I only want one window in the space. I think that as a nightclub and as a recording studio, I don't think that it's really necessary. Obviously, like, it'd be nice to have some light coming in. I don't think that it's particularly necessary to the program. This is, electronic musicians, dance musicians, people who are going to be making music that people dance to. I think they're pretty used to working in the dark. So as long as, there's an inviting character to the space, I think that's the most important thing. Single window into the live room, 4 double layers of laminated plate glass, separated by an air gap of approximately 12 inches, 7 feet in width, 4 feet tall, 2 feet deep, and 2 inches deep. Seat-on glass fiber gaskets, and 1 inch of plaster above a concrete block. That's just the kind of describing the construction of the window. So, Sabine RT60 calculations, fixing modal anomalies and unpleasant reverb in the space. I'll walk you through in the renderings, the measurements that I have for my the live room and the mix room. Basically, the live room is approximately 36 feet by 27 feet. 27 by 36 rather, and the mix room is, I believe, 10 by 13. With a height of 10. I got that right. I wasn't looking. And so this is the mix room. This is the live room. I liked this visualization for the live room. I thought that it was able to kind of, at least for me, I was kind of able to understand visualize how the sound traveled in such a large space. This was just another one of those acoustic room mode calculators. And this one is obviously the Excel sheet that were given in one of our assignments. So I was actually, it probably has to do with the fact that the live room is so big. And it's 15 feet high. The live room didn't seem like it had any modal anomalies that really jumped out. This was kind of fairly even. One of the things that I did notice, and I ran this a couple of times, and I was trying to fix. I think this was actually after I maybe fixed some things with this, but I noticed that there was often around 217 things. There's like some kind of like little bump exaggeration, and so I wanted to make sure that the low mids were effectively ameliorated in the mix room. I think I was just, in terms of the live room, my understanding and my feeling was, like there's probably some modal anomalies happening in the room, but it's so big, like it kind of makes sense that there are. I wasn't really freaking out about that. I think one of the things I latched onto early on in the process of doing this project was like, oh my God, like I need to take care of this. So that's why those are highlighted. And this is so after following the, my issue with my RT60 Sabine calculations a couple of weeks ago, I went back and I actually used these, and I found out the absorption coefficients for the separate materials used in the construction of the walls, the floor, and the ceiling, and the absorption. And I added them in, and this is for the mix room. I think that this is a pretty fair estimation as to how the absorption and isolation is going to, how the absorption is going to play into the sonic signature and the RT60 of the space. I got it to a place that I think was pretty even. Obviously, this is kind of a combination of the floating force system that I'm going to have. I'll get more to that in a minute. Some membrane absorption. I'll go over these, but anyway, this is just to show that I got it to a space that I felt confident that this was an accurate number. I have 120 over here. That's only because I included the absorption panels and diffusion that was on the walls in addition to the actual walls. And here we have the live room. I didn't want to overkill it with the amount of absorption and diffusion. And you might think that I still, when I show you, the amount of absorption that I have on the walls and diffusion, you might think that I still overdid it. I wanted it to fall in the optimal recommended range, but I didn't want it to be dead. I didn't want it to not have, this is the live room. I didn't want it to not sound like it was a room that was that big. It's part of the charm of it. It's part of the song signature. I didn't want to get rid of that. So there we have it. Turtle room acoustic surfaces and flanking paths, live and mix room. So, this is for, that essentially that's going to be the same system. This is just for, I'll highlight the differences here. A floating force system on top of concrete foundation with layers of insulation, gypcrete, plywood on joists for decoupling, topped with hardwood. The hardwood will be carpet in the mix room. The hardwood is for the live room. I went on, I think, Kinetics, their website, and found this, pretty cool floating force system that I added in here. I was specifically attracted to the impact isolation class number. It was pretty high, and I think that's a huge deal because there's going to be so many people stomping their feet on the floor as it's used for a dance club and venue, or rather a nightclub. Sorry, defining the program. It's probably not going to have live concerts, at least for the first few years. So the ceiling spring isolation system will work to provide a high static deflection value in the live room, and the contoured pattern as well as perforated Helmholtz paneling will work to absorb low frequencies and diffuse the high mid-range, specifically in the control room. So again, differentiating the ceiling in the ceilings are going to be pretty much the same in terms of the isolation in the control room and the live room. The only difference being is that the Helmholtz paneling is going to help with taming the low frequencies, probably maybe a little bit better in the space that's smaller and that's not as tall. Ensuring that the flanking paths in both rooms through wood paneling will cover most of the interior of the room, though wood paneling will cover most of the interior. This shouldn't interfere with proper caulking and wall seams to mitigate flanking paths at all corners. Considering the intensive recreational speaker setup that will adorn the live room, as well as the necessary electrical inputs for instruments and lights, baffling by the distance alone might be difficult. Therefore, the use of foam insulation and putty will be paramount in preventing direct sound leakage. I didn't add in an image for the caulking and putty and foam insulation. I thought it was pretty straightforward, but it's obviously very important, so I wanted to explain that. I added this picture from Public Records because I don't have, a monitor. I don't have it listed in my equipment, but for the speaker system in the live room, that will obviously be very important to the program. I would probably hire someone like Doug Turnbull to design speakers specifically for the space, as opposed to, using active mains or something like that, or even getting something that resembles a sound system that you would see at a festival. I want it to be specifically designed creatively for the space. Absorption and diffusion in the mix room. Bass absorption will be tamed with wood bass traps installed in the corners of the room, membranic 4-inch absorption panels. Low mids absorption, the RLX Waves Prism diffuser. Mids absorption, the fiberglass insulation and plywood as part of the wall construction. High mids absorption, sorry for the typo there. Fiberglass insulation and plywood as part of the wall construction. Diffusion, RPG QRD diffusers. I have this as like an example of one of the bass traps, a little diagram that was showing the absorption coefficient of the bass trap. Obviously, a membranic absorption panel, an RLX Wave Prism diffuser. The absorption and diffusion in the live room, wooden bass traps installed, pretty much the same thing. The only difference being I have the RPG Skyline, the perforated Helmholtz panels that will help with different frequencies at different thicknesses of the perforation. Signal flow, a collection of live room microphones, C800, U47, R121. I honestly picked some of my favorite mics for the collection. Control room synths, Prophet Juno Nord, Isobooth Signal. This is just to illustrate that there is a source signal. I'm not terribly concerned with the specialty of where the source signal is coming from. I think that as a production-oriented studio that has this massive live room that can be used by a band, it's more important, that the space is there and that we have pretty much the essentials for a proper studio. So, following signal flow, those signals will be fed into snake cables, XLR to 2x25 pins, and TS that will run from instrument microphone signals in the live room control rooms into the dual interfaces that we'll explain in a second. Cable covers will ensure cleanliness, while additional cable conduits will feed necessary power amplifiers in the machine room. ADAT. Dual interfaces will include premium AD-DA conversion in 2 units. The first unit will be the Apogee Symphony In and Out Mark II 16x16, mounted next to a Dangerous Music D-Box, Convert 80 Plus, Convert 8. These units each have slightly different clarity and coloration with their preamps, and each have 16 mono, 8 stereo input capabilities that will feed into the first 32 channels on the SSL matrix, which we'll get to in a second. Computer and console. A rack-mounted computer is a rack-mounted 1 terabyte SSD drive. This powerhouse of a machine is renowned for its performance and noiselessness and will be mounted on the desk. That was me. I wasn't copying that from a website. This will help for native-based DSP performance. There will be a 24-inch Samsung monitor. Though it's not part of the recording program, though it's not part of the recording program, it's worth mentioning that this setup will be stationed on a retractable rack underneath the desk, ready for use on public nights. Obviously, it is very important to the program of the studio, even though it's not part of the recording program. The console will be an SSL Matrix 2, sound and vision, 40 inputs, built-in patch router that allows for total recall, great for modern workflow, analog mix bus summing, and ease of use as a DAW controller. So rather than go through every little piece of outboard gear as an individual slide, I'll just quickly run through why I picked each one. Berklee Stereo Reverb Model 7, classic character. It's I've interned at Electric Lady, and they were always getting a Berklee from various renters. West Audio Dion compressor, analog bus compressor with digital recall. A lot of this is borrowed from Denny's Co-Use Studio, and as I mentioned, one of the things that I most liked about his studio was how it was, a lot of his outboard gear was very digital compliant analog gear that was meant to give character without sacrificing ease of use and digital workflow. on that same wavelength, the Fatso Saturation, UBK, round full analog sound as advertised, dangerous back EQ, favored among audiophiles, especially Denise co-use, mastering EQ, analog EQ with digital recall, and great visual interface. And then we have some, more classic ones, the Pultec. When I listen to, as a producer, when I listen to the Chic records, I'm just like, oh my God, he's running everything through the Pultec. And there's so many pictures of Nile Rodgers in front of racks of Pultec. So, I as far as great dance music goes, I don't think you can get that much better than that. So obviously want to emulate that. RS-124 compressors, legendary AMI compression, was in Abbey Road. Black box HG2 for mid-side processing, tube saturation, stereo compressor, tube tech, very standard. I was once told at Electric Lady that 95% of vocal pop music that happens today runs into, or at least in the program of that studio, runs into an Eve 1073 into the tube tech. Lexicon digital delay processor, just a classic. Signal flow monitoring and DSP. The mains. So I chose from Genelec the 7360's SAM Studio subwoofer to be placed below the 1238A. The choice, so this is the main and this is the sub. In the design, as we'll see, of my mix room, I was kind of wondering what the best kind of way for positioning with the subwoofer and the main, and I decided on doing two subwoofers and having them be relatively small in comparison to the mains. I did this for a couple of reasons. One, because the live room window is pretty much right in front of the console, and placing one subwoofer in phase in a way that doesn't obstruct the view and doesn't obstruct the console, doesn't do console bounce, was kind of difficult. So I was like, you know what? I've seen enough pictures of Genelec users, and I really like the Genelec brand, mounting subwoofers in their walls below the mains, and specifically too. And considering how wide the bass driver is in the mains, doing two small ones, I think was more than enough. They have built-in DSP. They're smart active monitors with calibration technology built in, so they can automatically adapt to their room and placement, which is awesome. Placed approximately 5 feet off the ground, angled slightly inward toward the mix position. So my near fields will be mounted next to each other via poles on either side of the mix position. With the amount of definition in the mains, midfields just felt would it be a little too much. So I have two different near field speakers. Aventone active mix cubes, which are great, small. They essentially do a really good job of recreating hi-fi sound that you might hear in an average setting. So not particularly warm, not particularly bright, not particularly characterful or colorful, but really good at getting a good, solid, full frequency range sound that isn't mind-numbing, but also you might hear when you're at a restaurant. Obviously, these are better than restaurant speakers, but it's within that realm, I would say. They're active and they sound good. And then Yamaha NS10s, because they're classics. Because why not? Because Bob Clearmountain is super famous and did a lot of the Chic records, so of course I want them. And using a Briston to 4B cubed dual mono amplifier Briston to amplify the NS10s that I will probably house in the console desks rack If not, put it in the machine room. It's so noiseless that I'm tempted to just keep it there as opposed to running it all the way into the machine room. But HVAC, as noted in the specific article, mini split systems are cheaper, more energy efficient, and quieter than typical HVAC systems. Heat pumps work best in temperate climates, making Manchester, Connecticut a great candidate. Also better for potential flanking paths. The lack of ducts and simple head unit installment will help mitigate direct sound transfer and will therefore prove more conducive to a high SDC rating. So this is all to say that the mini split system is just better. It's quieter, it's less obtrusive, and it's better for the environment. And in the end, it's over the course of a few years, it's also cheaper. In Manchester, because the climate is pretty temperate, it should be fine. Here we just have like a little diagram. I mean, this is a mini split system on the outside. This is probably what it would look like on the outside. Here we have on the inside an example of a head unit. In the live room, it'll probably take some experimentation with the amount of head units that we need for the live room because it's such a big room. I'm not particularly concerned about it getting too cold when lots of people are there, but when, it's just Red Hot Chili Peppers comes up and they're wondering why Anthony Kiedis can't take his shirt off without freezing, then that might be a problem. So we'll probably have to figure out how to best make sure that the live room, as big as it is, has enough heating and air conditioning. Machine room amplification for NS10s, perhaps, as noted before. Power for the SSL console, definitely, possibly the server for the Mac Pro. Storage space for cables, adapters, and small workspace for repairs, a la the shop at Electric Lady Studios. There is a lot of space that I allocated in the machine room, as I'll show you. Right now, I just have a bunch of diagrams of amplifiers essentially on the floor. I didn't go all in designing a machine room that looked indicative of the amount of amplification machinery that might be in there. It is something that would probably be defined a lot by construction. Like when we bring all the equipment in there, it's probably going to be like, well, okay, so what can we do in the machine room? What do we need to do in the machine room? As opposed to preemptively allocating lots of space for one thing that we end up not needing and too little space for something that we do. So here we are onto the renderings with measurements. The live room we have here. I have a 2D rendering of the live room, as also for the mixed room, as you'll see, and this kind of 2-point perspective rendering here that shows it in 3D. So here's the live room, and this is also just me labeling. This is where the sidewalk is in the street. 38 feet, around 27.8 feet wide, 38 feet long. I've got my membranic absorption panels and my skyline diffusion and the QRD diffusion, the bass traps here on the side. For, when the speakers are designed, they might be placed here. In that case, I don't know, maybe we'll get rid of some of that, or they might be placed on in the, higher up or over here even. I wasn't even really thinking too much about the placement of the speakers that haven't been designed yet. But obviously it's very important to the program. So, that'll be an important part of figuring out where they should best go in the space. I guess the main concern with putting them here is just having them so close to the live room. It may be a few feet out and just making sure that they're protected from passersby who are going in and out of the space, and specifically that it doesn't transfer back into the control room. Maybe if they're mounted up here, or even if there's some kind of mounting system that decouples it from the wall, but still keeping it high. And here's our mix room. 18 feet long, 15 feet to the base of this little trapezoid that we have right here where the mains are installed, and which are 3.7 feet long. Those little rectangles right there. And here's the window. It's 8 feet long. Or rather, the window isn't 8 feet long, but that space for the window is. And here we have our mix position, our mains directed at it. I actually, in my 3D rendering, I pulled the mix position a little bit back. I pulled a little bit back because just as a more realistic representation of where mix position would be. But here we have our SSL, our desk, our near fields, and as you can see here, they're positioned. So we've got our monitor right here. We've got our window into the live room. Obviously, the monitor, it's on a pole right now. I guess the idea is that it will just be positioned dependent on the program at the time. If it's a thing where we have a group that really we want to be locked in with, and it's really important, then maybe we'll put it off to the side. If we have maybe we don't have a group though, maybe they're all in the control room, or maybe the artist is in the control room, or maybe it's not so important that they're being seen and being watched, then maybe the monitor's here. Obviously, if it's for DJing, the monitor needs to be front and center. And here we have our couch for artists to check out and listen to the music. I believe that with the amount of power coming from these speakers, and with the amount of diffusion and absorption, that the sonic signature of the room will be quite conducive to the artists enjoying the act of listening to what they just did. Here's our machine room. Again, I have some amplification on the floor. It wouldn't look like this, obviously, but this is just to show that machinery can live in this space, that it is that big, 13 feet long by 9.2 feet. 13 feet wide by 9.2 feet long. And so this is to show that, we probably we might not even need half the room for machinery, or for at least heavy machinery like that actually needs to be housed. So maybe there is space for a little workshop desk and maybe a little rack of cables. And here's the ISO booth. I followed your advice that I got, the comment that the room shouldn't be equal in length. I made it just a bit shorter in terms of height, so it's 7 feet long and 8 feet wide. It's got some diffusion in here, absorption rather, and it's pretty well brute force partitioned off from all sides. Sound lock in a hallway. The double door in here leads to a control room, sound lock. No, sorry, it's not a double door. It's just the single door from the mix room leads into this sound lock, and which leads into the hallway, which leads into the social room. So we have a really great amount of isolation between what happens in the social room and what happens in the control room. And here we have our social room. We have a bar, hardwood floor, and here's the live room sound lock. I think it's specifically with our program, it doesn't really matter that there's not as much isolation between these two, because when artists are tracking, then they're going to be tracking, and there's not going to be that much socializing happening, hopefully. When the public is accessing the space, they're going to be accessing both spaces. So it's important that there is a kind of ease, a continuous drift, if you will, between both spaces. And here we have the beloved restrooms. And this is just to show that I planned this. Quite a bit of space between the live room and the edge of the restroom. And here we have the edge of the building. And that's also visible here. This is the edge of the building, the eastern edge. And as I'll just show, just for reference, this is the western edge toward the street. And in conclusion, Continuous Drift has a unique program, but one that can work equally well as a nightclub and recording studio. The design is crafted with care. It features careful acoustic planning and the use of top-end curated equipment. This is a simulated project, but if it were actualized, I think it would be a success. I think it would be a unique blend of programming between dance music production and dance music enjoyment that, the Hacienda, I think, hinted at as being this kind of, as Factory Records being this nexus between production and enjoyment. But, wasn't fully actualized. And I think, there's some spaces like Public Records that get close, but they're live venues, they're restaurants, they're bars. They're not specifically studios. The blend of these two, I think, will create a really interesting environment, and one that is particularly pertinent to what Chetroglovs was saying in his essay. I know that a lot of my inspiration is kind of taken from blending the experience of being an artist with the experience of being a listener. And with that, I thank you so much, Professor Storyk. It's been a great semester. I feel like I've just absorbed so much information, and I've tried to exact it on this specific presentation and project. And I end with this little picture of the doors that I cleaned many times, and it's been a privilege learning from you, the designer of this great studio. So thank you so much.